Try not to think for 60 seconds. Set a timer on your phone if you need to. Ready? Begin. Most people notice right away that the instruction itself spawns dozens of thoughts. The judge that says you can't do it, the planner that lists groceries, a memory that pops up uninvited. If your mind filled with commentary, congratulations, you just confirmed the point. Thoughts appear without asking you. They arrive like weather. You didn't decide to have them, they just showed up. That's the doorway we're using. Chapter 1. The 60-second no-thought experiment that changes everything. Here's what just happened, plain and simple. Awareness was present before, during, and after the stream of thoughts. You noticed the thoughts. You weren't the thought itself. That noticing, that open, observing presence is the simplest evidence you have that you are more than the content that passes through your head. This is not a metaphysical claim to blind faith. It's an invitation to verify for yourself. For most people, the first time they seriously try the 60-second no-thought experiment, the experience is striking because it makes a clear distinction between thought and the observer of thought. That gap, once experienced, becomes the practical lever for everything that follows. A brief scientific anchor. Some neuropsychological research, work that traces back to experiments by Benjamin Libet and follow-ups, shows that in certain decision tasks there are measurable brain signals that precede the conscious awareness of deciding. Researchers interpret those findings in different ways. They don't collapse the mystery of human choice into a single story. For our purposes, the useful implication is modest. Not all mental activity arises as conscious intention. There is unconscious processing that prepares content, and conscious awareness often encounters what the brain is already in the process of constructing. Use that as a prompt for curiosity, not as a verdict on free will. Before we go further, do one practical thing. Pause the video now and do the 60-second no-thought experiment. Set a timer for 60 seconds. During that time, cultivate the attitude of an interested observer. You are watching the mind produce content. Don't force silence, simply notice what appears and what fades. After the timer, take 30 seconds to write one short line. Most present thought was about blank. Come back when you're done. If you just did that, what did you discover? Many people report 3 immediate outcomes. 1. Thoughts arrive without invitation. 2. Those thoughts have emotional weight. And 3. Noticing them creates a new space, a small but palpable gap between the thought and your response. That gap is where causality begins to shift. Think of it this way. When you identify with a thought, when a thought becomes me or my story, it acts like a filter. The filter interprets incoming data, prioritizes certain options, and tunes the nervous system into a particular frequency. When you instead stand as the observer, that filter loosens. Options you didn't previously see become visible. The claim at the heart of everything we'll explore is simple and testable. The second you see yourself as the cause, the observer who precedes and witnesses thought, reality begins to reverse the habitual pattern it has been following around you. By reverse, I mean this. What used to automatically pull toward the same outcomes, reactive patterns, repetitive failures, stuck feelings, starts to respond differently because you're no longer driving the car from the back seat. Chapter 2. Why this matters. Thought as a predictive machine. Your brain is a prediction machine. It's designed to anticipate what will happen next based on past input. That's adaptive. Predicting saves energy, speeds reaction, and helps survival. But the same machinery that predicts the trajectory of a thrown ball also predicts social outcomes, future feelings, and self-identity. If your past has reinforced the conclusion, "I'm not good enough," your predictive brain is going to prioritize experiences that fit that conclusion. It will notice failures more than successes, read neutral faces as judgmental, and generate a constant inner narration that confirms the expectation. There's a feedback loop. Thought produces feeling. Feeling tunes the nervous system broadcasts a particular frequency, metaphorically speaking, through posture, micro-expressions, tone of voice, and how you approach tasks. Other people and situations respond to that broadcast. Over time, patterns settle into what looks like destiny, but is actually a self-reinforcing habit of attention and physiology. To make the metaphor concrete, imagine thought as a radio station and awareness as the person holding the radio. If you're identified with the station, you believe the music is who you are. Your posture, mood, and choices align with the playlist. But if you recognize you're the listener holding the radio, you can change the station, adjust the volume, or turn the radio off. The field that you broadcast shifts. Heart math research and similar psychophysiological studies measure the heart's electromagnetic activity and show that certain states, calm coherence versus chaotic stress, have different measurable signatures. Those studies suggest the body's state correlates with a kind of broadcast pattern. We're using those findings as supportive context, not as proof that an electromagnetic field literally rewrites the external world. The radio metaphor is explanatory. It helps you visualize how internal coherence changes the way you show up and therefore the way the environment responds. Chapter 3. The first practical lever. Thought labeling. 7-day starter. If the 60-second experiment is the demonstration, thought labeling is the tool you use to create consistency. Metacognitive awareness, the capacity to notice that you're thinking, is a muscle. Labeling strengthens it.
How to do the thought labeling practice. 1. Commit to 7 days. 2. Each morning, set aside 5 minutes in a quiet place. 3. Set a timer for 5 minutes. Bring gentle attention to your breathing for a few breaths. 4. As thoughts arise, silently name them with short labels: planning, memory, worry, judgment, fantasy, physical sensation, anticipation, self-criticism. Keep labels simple and descriptive. Avoid story or commentary. 5. After labeling, return to the breath or the body as your anchor. 6. At the end of the 5 minutes, write one line in a small notebook. Most common labels today were blank. Emotion I noticed was blank. Why labeling works? By naming the thought as a type of mental event, you create a space between the content and your identification with it. The name is a mental punctuation mark. It recognizes the thought, but refuses to become the narrative. After a few days, simple labeling often reduces the urgency of reactive thoughts and increases your capacity to choose how to respond rather than reflexively react. Examples of labels and what they reveal. Planning often indicates practical, future-oriented thought. It can be useful but becomes anxiety when combined with catastrophic outcomes. Memory ties current feeling to past events. Noticing this lets you ask, is this present or is it a replay? Judgment is a pattern that tends to close options. Labeling it helps you open curiosity instead. Self-criticism usually maps to identity statements. Flagging it creates distance. Daily microtasks to extend the practice into everyday life. When you feel a spike of reactivity, an argument beginning in your chest, name it once: defensiveness. Say the label silently, take a breath, decide your next action from that gap. Before a conversation you dread, label the pre-conversation thoughts: prediction, shame, should. Doing so often shifts posture and tone. What to expect from 7 days. Increased recognition of habitual thought types.
a clearer sense of which thoughts are old recordings and which are useful planning. Slightly more control over reactive impulses. Not total elimination, this is not about getting rid of thoughts, but a consistent widening of the space in which you can choose. A concrete, ordinary example. You're about to speak with a sibling who has a long history of comparing your achievements to theirs. Normally, your chest tightens, your voice raises, and the pattern plays out. If you've practiced labeling, you may catch the pre-conversation rush, comparison. That one label opens a pause. In that pause, you can choose a different response. Ask a clarifying question, lower your tone, or simply step back. The conversation rarely needs to escalate when you stop feeding the automatic narrative.
Mini hook. Before we move deeper, consider this. What would change in your work, relationships, or money story if you could consistently create even a 2-second gap between stimulus and response? That gap invites new possibility. Chapter 4. Tracing the Source. Why Some Thoughts Keep Returning. Preview and instructions to begin. Some thoughts are recurrent because they are habits of attention. Others are charged because they carry unresolved emotion linked to earlier events. Source tracking is the practice of tracing a recurring thought back to its origin. It's investigative and sometimes tender work. We'll approach it like a careful archaeologist. No demolition, just excavation. Begin a first phase of source tracking now with these simple steps. 1. Identify one recurring charged thought, one that reliably produces agitation, shame, or freeze. 2. Over the next week, whenever that thought arises, label it and briefly note in your journal the context, where you were, who you were with, bodily sensations, and what the thought said. 3. At the end of each day, take 5 minutes and ask, when else have I felt this? Look for the earliest memory that shares the emotional tone. You're not trying to judge the past, only to map it. Example, the recurring thought, I'm not enough, might trace back to a classroom incident where you were singled out, or to a sibling rivalry where praise was always comparative. Discovering the origin doesn't erase the past, but it reframes the present. Once you see that this particular alarm comes from an old tape, you can stop treating it as a real-time verdict. That reframing changes your nervous system's response and, over time, the way other people respond to you. A practical structure for the first 2 weeks. Week 1, focus on labeling and daily jotting, 5 minutes each evening recording context and the label. Week 2, deepen with a short reflective session, 10 minutes every other day, where you gently interrogate the earliest memory associated with the emotion. Remember, this is not therapy, it's a structured attention practice. If you encounter deep trauma, slow down and consider working with a trained professional. The intention is exploratory and empirical, not clinical diagnosis. Interlude. The nervous system as broadcaster. Brief conceptual bridge. I want to return to the radio field idea for a moment because it's a helpful bridge between inner practice and outward change. Your nervous system broadcasts more than you think, through breath, posture, facial microexpressions, tone of voice, and even the cadence of your movements. Those signals influence how others perceive you and how circumstances unfold. HeartMath research provides data that different emotional states are associated with different patterns of physiological coherence. When you practice non-identification and increase your internal coherence, the metaphorical broadcast shifts from erratic static to a clearer signal. That clearer signal attracts a different range of responses from the environment, not by mystical force, but because coherent presence organizes behavior in yourself and elicits different responses in others. Chapter 5. Anchoring Awareness. The twice-daily 10-minute practice, introduction and first steps. If labeling builds the muscle of noticing and source tracking maps the past, the awareness anchor is where you practice residing in the cause rather than the effect. The anchor trains you to rest in awareness itself, so that during the day, when thoughts and habits arise, you remember to return to that root state. How to start the anchor practice. 1. Commit to 2 periods each day for 10 minutes.
morning within an hour of waking, and late afternoon around a natural transition, lunch break, end of work block, work well. 2. Sit comfortably. Close or soften your eyes. Begin with 3 slow, intentional breaths. 3. Shift attention to the felt sense of presence, the simple fact of noticing. This is not thinking about noticing, it's the raw perception of presence. 4. When thoughts arise, label them briefly, then return to the felt sense of being. If your mind wanders entirely, gently return, no scolding. 5. After 10 minutes, write one sentence. Today I noticed blank. My body felt blank. One small change I could try is blank. Why the twice daily rhythm matters. Dedicating 2 short windows anchors the habit of being the observer. Over time, these sessions create a baseline of coherence you can carry into interactions. They act like charging cycles for your capacity to remain cause rather than effect. A small, concrete practice inside the anchor for the first week. At minute 3, take a quick body scan from head to toe. At minute 6, visualize a recent situation you handled poorly. Observe the thoughts that rise. Label them. See if the felt sense of presence stays available. At minute 9, imagine holding a difficult conversation with compassionate curiosity. Notice how your posture and tone would shift if you remained in the observer. Chapter 6. A practical case, the conversation that used to derail you. Picture a common scenario. You have to give feedback to a colleague who tends to deflect responsibility. In the past, you enter the interaction tense, your jaw clenched, your voice sharp. The conversation escalates or you leave unsatisfied. Now imagine you've done 7 days of labeling and practiced the 10-minute anchor twice daily for 2 weeks. As the meeting begins, the old reactive thought, "I'll be dismissed," surfaces. You label it, expectation, and feel the tightness in your chest. That label creates a space. You take a breath and settle into the felt sense of presence. Your voice is calmer. You ask a direct question rather than launching an accusation. The colleague, hearing a calmer tone, is less defensive. The conversation shifts.
You've altered the pattern, not because you changed reality by sheer will, but because you changed the initial broadcast that set the scenario in motion. This is the reversal in practical terms. The habitual sequence, thought, reactivity, outcome, gets interrupted. Once interrupted, new outcomes become possible. Chapter 7. Small Data. How to Journal What Actually Happens. If you want to know whether these practices change your life in meaningful ways, you need small, consistent data. That's what the Reality Response Journal is for. A simple, low-bandwidth tool that allows you to track correlations between internal practice and external responses. How to set up a basic journal, starter blueprint. Use a small notebook or a notes app with dated entries. Each day, write 3 lines. 3-minute context, where you practiced, time, place. What I observed internally, 1 or 2 labels and sensations. What changed externally, 1 concrete sentence. Did a conversation go differently? Did you notice an unexpected opportunity? Did you feel calmer? A weekly template. Day 1 to 7, baseline week. Continue labeling and anchoring. Note what happens without trying to force outcomes. At the end of week 1, read through entries. Highlight recurring thought labels and any early sign of change. Week 2 onward, begin intentional experiments. Enter a specific situation with the intention to remain the observer and note differences. Example entry. Monday, 8:15 a.m. Anchor practice. Labels: planning, guilt. Body, tight chest. External: asked for help at work. Colleague responded more openly than usual. Wednesday, 3 p.m. During difficult call. Label: shame. Response: breathed, labeled, asked clarification, call ended with agreement on next steps. The goal of the journal is not to prove anything grandiose. It's to create a habit of noticing cause and effect in your lived experience so you can make decisions informed by data rather than by old beliefs. Chapter 8. Preparing for Deeper Work. The 14-Day Source Tracking and the 30-Day Reality Journal. Overview. We're moving from immediate verification into a longer arc. The practices you've begun, 60-second experiment, 7 days of labeling, twice daily anchors, are the first scaffolding. The next phase is to apply source tracking for 14 days and to begin a 30-day reality journal. I'll give you the steps now so you can prepare materials and set intentions, and in the next section we'll walk through the day-by-day choreography. 14-day source tracking in short. Choose one charged recurring thought. Label consistently and record context each time it arises. At the end of each day, write down the earliest memory linked to the emotion. At day 7, review and reframe one discovery into a new explanatory sentence that removes present judgment. For example, this response came from a childhood comparison. It's a pattern, not a fact. Before we go further, take a moment to prepare for the next level. Get a small notebook or create a single folder in your Notes app titled Reality Response Journal. Decide on a consistent time for your 5-minute morning labeling and your 2 10-minute anchor practices. Choose one recurring charged thought to start source tracking, one that, if it shifted, would make a real difference in your day. If you can, identify one person you trust and tell them you're doing this work for 30 days. Ask if they'll be a gentle witness to your findings. We're about to move into the more sustained protocols. 2 weeks of focused source work, the nightly categorization of thought origins, and the full 30-day reality journal with intentional response experiments. Those phases require a little more discipline and a little more structure, which is why the preparation matters. But before we open that longer door, let's tighten one last thread, the internal mechanics that make this reversal coherent, psychologically and physiologically. If metacognition is the skill you're training, the nervous system is the instrument. You can't create lasting change by thinking alone. You must also change the embodied pattern that reacts in the world. The anchor practice and daily labeling begin that integration, but the next steps amplify it. We'll go into the 14-day source tracking protocol and the 21-day thought origin categorization next. You'll be given exact daily prompts for what to write in the journal, specific questions to ask when tracing earliest memories, and a night routine for categorizing thoughts into direct, personal history and collective field origins. We'll also practice a 30-day identity shift protocol with phased language work and embodiment cues so the new identity doesn't remain only intellectual. For now, have your journal ready. If you haven't yet done the 60-second experiment, do it now and write the single sentence, "Most present thought was blank." If you completed it earlier, reread your note and notice whether your body still holds any residue from that test. The work ahead is simple in principle and demanding in practice. It asks you to be both curious and consistent. Take a breath. Notice where in your body you feel the impulse to rush toward outcomes, toward results, proof, or dramatic change. That impulse is normal. We won't chase dramatic promises. We'll collect small, reproducible signals, slightly calmer conversations, a different tone on the phone, an unexpected opportunity that doesn't feel coercive but rather aligned. Those small signals add up. Now, prepare to begin the 14-day source tracking protocol in the next section, where I'll walk you step by step through days 1 to 14, including exact journal prompts, the evening reframing exercise, and how to identify when a memory is ready to be reframed. We'll also introduce the nightly categorization method that helps you disentangle what's truly yours from what's been borrowed from the collective field. Before we open that next chapter, one practical grounding exercise to close this stage.
Sit quietly for 2 minutes, breathe naturally, and ask this question silently. What is the simplest observation I can make right now about my thinking? Let the answer be one brief label. Write it down. That small act anchors you in the mode of experiment. When you're ready, we'll step into the 14-day instruction set. Day 1. The excavation begins. Today you start with one clear intent: gather reliable microdata. In the morning, do your 5-minute labeling practice. During the day, whenever your chosen charged thought appears, label it and make a one-line note in your journal. Time, short label, one bodily sensation. In the evening, spend 10 minutes reviewing entries and ask 2 questions. Where did the feeling seem first familiar? And what was happening around me when it first showed up? Write the earliest memory that comes to mind, even if it's fuzzy. Don't analyze, simply record. Concrete journal prompt for day 1 evening. Recurring thought. Labels used today. Earliest memory, 1 sentence. 1 physical marker I noticed. Day 2, mapping the pattern. Repeat the morning 5-minute labeling and the twice daily anchors if you can. During the day, notice not only when the thought appears, but what precedes it by a few moments: a comment, a passing sense, a tone of voice. In the evening, compare today's earliest memory to yesterday's. Is there overlap? If so, note the common thread, maybe a setting, classroom, dinner table, a type of authority figure, critical, absent, or a bodily sensation, tight throat, sinking stomach. Day 3, gentle hypothesis. By now you have 3 days of microdata. Form a tentative, non-judgmental hypothesis about the origin. This pattern seems linked to moments when authority figures were impatient, or it surfaces during comparison. Write that hypothesis in your journal and test it during the day. When the thought arises, label it, name the hypothesis silently, and notice whether the emotional charge shifts even slightly. Day 4, adding context. Keep labeling and note if the thought's intensity varies by context: crowd versus one-on-one, digital interactions versus in-person, mornings versus evenings. In the evening, create a short table in your notebook with columns: context, intensity 1 to 10, earliest memory link. This simple structure helps you see patterns without overthinking. Day 5, first reframing. Take one early memory you've identified and write a neutral explanatory sentence that reduces moral weight. Example: if the core memory is "teacher singled me out," a neutral reframe could be, "That event was a moment when I felt seen under pressure. It shaped my nervous system's alert mode." Make the reframe brief. Repeat it silently once in the anchor practice and write down any subtle shift. Day 6, cross-checking. Over the next 2 days, test whether the reframe changes the frequency or tone of the recurring thought. Continue labeling and journaling. Note any small external differences. Did anyone react differently when you acted from the gap created by the reframe? Record one example. Day 7, weekly synthesis. At day 7, do a short synthesis. Read the week's entries, underline recurring labels and the most common context markers. Write a single paragraph summarizing your findings, triggers, earliest memory, reframe, and one observable external change. This week's purpose was mapping, not erasing, so honor the data you collected. Day 8, deepening the inquiry. Now begin the second week of source tracking with an added step. In one short session of 10 minutes every other day, use guided curiosity to explore the earliest memory in slightly more detail. Ask neutral questions. How old was I? What did the room smell like? Who was present? Record sensory details more than meaning. Sensory details often unlock associations without creating narrative loops. Day 9, nightly categorization begins. 21-day scaffold. Tonight, start the nightly categorization routine that will run across the 21-day window. For each charged thought you noted today, write one of 3 origin categories beside the journal entry. Direct, the thought arises from a present situation, for example, I forgot the meeting. Personal history, the thought maps to a past event or pattern, for example, replay of a school memory. Collective field, the thought resonates with broader narratives you've absorbed, cultural messages, family myths, social media scripts. If you're unsure which category fits, mark the one that feels closest and add a question mark. Over time, the distribution of categories will tell you where most of your energy is invested. Day 10, strengthening metacognition. Use your 5-minute morning session to intentionally notice category signals. As you label a thought, add the categories silently. This tiny addition trains you to source track in the moment instead of only in the evening. Days 11 through 14, consolidation and gentle experimentation. Continue labeling, anchoring, and nightly categorization. On day 12, introduce one behavioral experiment. Choose a context where the thought typically appears and intentionally apply a micro-shift. Pause, label, and ask one clarifying question or make a small behavioral change. Lower your tone, soften posture, delay an answer by one breath. Note the external result. The aim is to test whether altering the internal broadcast shifts interactions in immediate, observable ways. End of day 14, midpoint review. At the end of 2 weeks, read through your entries and quantify what you can. Number of times the thought appeared, predominant categories, and any external changes. Write a 1-page reflection answering what shifted, what persisted.
What surprised me? This midpoint review gives you actionable insight before moving into the 30-day reality response journal. Nightly categorization guidance, days 1 through 21 specifics. Each night for 3 weeks, spend 5 to 10 minutes categorizing the day's recurring thoughts into direct, personal history, and collective field origins. Use these prompts. Did this thought clearly respond to something present? If yes, mark direct. Did this thought carry the emotional tone of an earlier memory? If yes, mark personal history and note the memory's age. Did this thought mirror a social narrative? What success looks like, how one should behave? If yes, mark collective field and identify the likely source: family message, media, cultural myth. At the end of week 3, count proportions. If a large share falls into personal history, prioritize reframing early memories. If collective field dominates, do an additional task. For 3 days, replace one collective thought with an alternative narrative that you compose consciously. For example, swap "I must be perfect" with "I can be curious." The 30-day reality response journal, day-by-day architecture. Week 1, days 1 through 7, baseline mapping. Continue labeling, anchoring, source tracking, and nightly categorization without forcing outcomes. Aim for faithful recording. Week 2, days 8 through 14. Introduce small intentional experiments. Each day, pick one situation where the charged thought would normally shape your response. Enter it with the intention to observe from the gap, apply one micro-shift, and record the external result. Week 3, days 15 through 21. Amplify experiments by combining internal shifts with small behavioral changes. When the thought appears, label, take a slow breath, and enact a different approach. For instance, ask, "Can you say more?" instead of defending. Record outcome and emotional tone. Week 4, days 22 through 30. Integration and pattern testing. Use your reframe sentences and identity language shifts, we'll get to these, and deliberately step into situations that previously activated the pattern to test whether the nervous system responds differently. Write a summary on day 30, patterns, surprises, and the clearest correlation between internal state and external response. Specific daily journal template, 30 days. Date, anchor practice time and duration, primary labels noticed today, category, direct,
personal history, collective field. 1 situational test, brief description. External result, concrete sentence. Body note, 1 physical sensation. 1 small reframe or action I will practice tomorrow. Identity shift protocol, 30 days in phases. Phase A, days 1 through 10, awareness naming and soft rephrasing. Daily task, capture 3 habitual I am statements you notice. Rephrase each into an observational sentence. There is a thought that I am blank. Repeat silently and write each instance. Embodiment cue. After each rephrase, take 1 intentional breath and relax the jaw.
Phase B, days 11 through 20, constructive counterstatements and micro-embodiment. Daily task. For each observational rephrase, create 1 neutral or affirmative practice sentence that describes choice rather than fact. I notice a thought that I'm not enough. Arrow. I can try 1 small thing that proves curiosity is more useful than certainty. Embodiment cue. Greet the day with a 2-minute practice of soft posture. Shoulders back, chest open, slow breath. Hold for 10 seconds while silently repeating 1 constructive counterstatement. Phase C, days 21 through 30, behavioral embodiment and public testing. Daily task. Pick 1 identity shift statement to embody publicly. Calmly ask for clarification, offer a different perspective, accept help. After each public enactment, journal the external response. Embodiment cue. Prepare a short physical anchor before the event. 5 slow breaths, hand on heart. Speak the reframe silently. Examples of reframed I am statements and scripts. Old. I'm always too emotional. Reframe. There is a thought that I'm overly emotional. Right now, I can notice sensation and choose whether to act on it. Old. I'm bad with money. Reframe. A thought says I'm bad with money. I can consult facts and take 1 small budgeting step. Old. I'm not a leader. Reframe. There is an old script that says I'm not a leader. I can try a brief leadership behavior and note the outcome. Daily integration practice, the 20-minute morning routine. This routine is designed to prime your nervous system so that the shift from thought-based identity to awareness-based identity is sustainable. It's practical, reproducible, and broken into 4 parts, totaling 20 minutes. Part 1, 3 minutes, awareness recognition. Sit quietly. Notice that you are aware of thoughts without elaboration. Name the simplest observation in 1 phrase and write it as a sticky note. I notice thought X. Part 2, 5 minutes, thought observation. Do a short labeling cycle. Breathe in, notice thoughts for 2 minutes, silently label each dominant thought once, return to the breath. Part 3, 7 minutes, sensation observation and embodiment. Body scan from the top of the head to the soles. Where tension exists, breathe into it and soften. Combine a 1-word label for the sensation, tightness or warmth, with a counter-action. Release shoulders, soften face. Part 4, 5 minutes, reality preview. Consciously imagine a specific upcoming interaction with calm curiosity. Hold the felt sense of presence while visualizing the situation unfolding with different, less reactive choices. See small, believable variations. Lower tone. Ask a question. Pause. Notice how your body feels when you imagine this different approach. Do this routine each morning for the 30-day phase. Record 1 line after completion. Today's preview felt blank. 1 micro action I'll try is blank.
How to read small data and avoid confirmation bias. As you gather entries across weeks, aim to treat the journal like a scientific log, not a self-affirmation diary. Use simple metrics. Frequency. How often did the chosen thought appear each day? Intensity. Average felt intensity on a 1 to 10 scale. External response. Percentage of situations that shifted positively, e.g., a calmer conversation, a clearer decision. Avoid weighting single dramatic anecdotes more than steady, modest trends. A single big synchronicity is tempting to over-interpret. What matters more is incremental change, fewer automatic escalations, small increases in curiosity, slightly different responses from others. Those accumulate. Dealing with setbacks and entrenched patterns. Expect days when the old pattern is strong. When setbacks happen, use curiosity as the primary response. Ask, what did I label? Where did my body go? Which category did this thought land in tonight? If a memory or sensation is overwhelming, slow the process, shorten the practice length, step away from source tracking, and prioritize grounding. If trauma surfaces, seek a trained therapist. This protocol is investigative and self-regulatory, not a substitute for clinical care. Collective fieldwork and responsible tuning. You are rarely only broadcasting a private signal. Collective narratives, family scripts, cultural expectations, political climates leak into your thought stream. When you notice collective field origins dominate your nightly categorization, practice a short buffer. For 2 days, whenever a collective thought arises, label it and replace it mentally with a gently corrective statement you compose. Examples. Collective thought. Success looks like being constantly busy. Corrective. I choose measures of success that include rest. Collective thought. Vulnerability is weakness. Corrective. Vulnerability is information I can use. This is not magical erasure of cultural forces. It's hygienic tuning. It reduces the reflexive adoption of group beliefs and increases the likelihood you'll respond from chosen values rather than default scripts. How the nervous system shift changes relational dynamics. Specific examples. Difficult conversation with family. Previously, your pattern might have been immediate defensive. After 2 weeks of anchors and labeling, you pause, label defensiveness, speak with a softer tone, and observe the other person lower their voice in response. The reversal here is small but meaningful. The initial broadcast no longer primes escalation. Work presentation. Previously, you might rehearse catastrophes. After repeated reality preview practice, you enter the room with a steadier breath, ask one clarifying question before speaking, and notice more collaborative input from colleagues. Money anxiety? Instead of freezing or compulsively checking accounts, you label anxiety. Take one small administrative action, one budget line item, and observe a sense of increased agency. Over time, your financial behavior shifts from avoidance or panic to incremental management. Stories of modest but repeatable change. These are archetypal examples, not promises. Someone practicing with a consistent journal reported that after 3 weeks of labeling and anchors, they noticed 2 small but concrete shifts. Fewer heated messages with a partner, and one unexpected professional opportunity they felt more able to accept. Another person found that tracing a shameful performance memory to a childhood event allowed them to test a different behavior at work, asking for feedback, which led to clearer expectations and less rumination. These are the sorts of small signals the methods are designed to surface. Ethical notes on causation and interpretation. When you observe external shifts after internal practice, treat them as meaningful correlations, not proof of absolute causation. Several mechanisms plausibly explain why things change. Different body language invites different responses, reduced reactivity creates space for new options, and your attention biases reveal opportunities you previously ignored. Use these interpretations as practical working theories, not metaphysical guarantees. Maintaining momentum beyond 30 days. If you want to keep advancing, choose one of two sustainable paths. Path A, routine maintenance. Continue the 20-minute morning integration practice 3 to 5 times a week and shorter daily labeling, 2 minutes on other days. Keep the reality response journal habit to 2 or 3 nightly entries per week. Path B, deep work. Cycle through another 30-day identity phase focusing on a core belief or social narrative. Pair this with periodic accountability check-ins with a trusted friend or coach. One final practical checklist before we close. Journal ready and organized. Timer set for practice durations, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. One charged thought selected for source tracking. A trusted witness identified, if possible, to boost follow-through, a plan for professional support if heavy material arises. The reversal clarified. All of these practices hinge on a simple pivot, from identifying as the content of your mind to repeatedly recognizing yourself as the presence that notices content. That shift changes your internal broadcast, your posture, breath, tone, and those embodied changes alter how situations unfold. The word reverse here describes a soft reorientation of causal flow. You move from reacting to histories and social patterns towards initiating responses from an anchored awareness. The outcomes you observe are probabilistic shifts, not guaranteed rewrites of destiny.
They're measurable in the small, everyday ways that matter. Calmer exchanges, clearer choices, fewer reactive loops. A short guided micro-experience, 30 seconds. Set a timer for 30 seconds. Sit with soft eyes. Notice any thought that arises. Name it with one word. Notice the sensation in your body for a moment, where the energy sits. Take one deliberate, slow breath and imagine that the space around the thought is clear and wide. If a judge arises, say, judging. If a plan arises, say, planning. At the end of 30 seconds, notice one small difference: a loosened jaw, a softened breath, an eased chest. Write one sentence. Right now, I notice blank, and one small change is blank. Closing invitation and final commitment. The second you see yourself as the cause, the observer that precedes thought, you shift how experience responds to you. That shift accumulates through repeated, measurable practice. If you're willing to test this rigorously, commit to one structured cycle. The 30-day reality response journal combined with the 30-day identity shift protocol and the daily 20-minute morning integration. For the next 30 days, each night track 3 recurring thoughts and 1 external result. At the end of the month, read your journal and ask, what correlations emerged? What surprised me? If you want accountability, choose one person and tell them your commitment. If you choose to experiment, do it as a scientist of your own life. Gather small data, avoid grand narratives, and let gradual evidence change your map. The claim is simple and testable. When you move from being the product of thought to being the perceiving presence, the habitual patterns that have shaped your outcomes begin to loosen. That's the reversal. Commit now. Set your journal, choose your charged thought, and begin tomorrow with the 5-minute labeling and the 20-minute morning routine. Do this for 30 days and notice what, in small, reliable ways, starts to respond differently. Thank you for taking this seriously. When you're ready, set a timer for 30 seconds,
Do the micro-experience above, then write one line in your journal. Day 0, most present thought was blank. Begin tomorrow.